Apple Knocker Radio.
Greetings, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. My next guest is author, philosopher, and astrologer Jaime Paul Lamb. Lamb's contributions to the study of the esoteric are far too many to mention here, so plenty of links will be provided in the description box below this recording. Through the Institute for Hermetic Studies, Lamb has courses on classical astrology and the esoteric tradition, and theory and practice of classical natal astrology. Those links will also be provided, and I recommend everybody go check those courses out. Now, Jaime is a brilliant and truly independent thinker, and I really appreciated this conversation, just as I respect his writing tremendously. I just respect everything that he puts out there, and I really like the way he approaches these topics. He brings real intellectual firepower. He doesn't take any easy answers, no easy ways out. He goes for the heart every single time, goes deep, and I really appreciate that in thinkers, especially in this sphere where, let's face it, some people kind of stick to the surface, stick to the easy stuff and the kind of things that sound good and make you feel good. Lamb's not like that. Lamb goes deep and he looks for hard answers, and he traces back this information far into the past, which is something that I just admire significantly. And so, with that, I will shut my pie hole and allow Jaime Paul Lamb to do the talking, and I appreciate everyone stopping by for the listen, and I hope you're all having a great 2024. For me, I never cared about astrology. I thought it was complete nonsense until 2019, late 2019, and I was really into Gordon White, the guy. He wrote Chaos Protocols. He runs a site called Ruin Soup. And I was just looking up his work, and I found an interview he did with an astrologer named Austin Kopik, I think is how you say it.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I'm familiar.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Cool. And there, I remember as they were talking about the year ahead, it was their year ahead look, and it was kind of this like apocalyptic, like preview. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, yeah, whatever, dude. I decide my destiny. Nobody else does. I don't believe in it. And then 2020 happened. And so that like really rearranged my thinking about the whole topic. So, but my first question to you, before we get into the real meat of the stuff, could you explain to the viewers and the listeners how you came about being interested in astrology?
Yeah, for sure. So it was about 12 years ago, a little over 12 years ago, I had a major just life shift, a paradigm shift that was brought about by sort of a crisis. And the first of what would be several over the following years. But so I ended up, that's when I got into Freemasonry. Around that time, that was one of the components that I knew had to be in place, just innately knew that had to be in place so I could build what I envisioned in terms of an edifice of character and philosophy and things. So shortly after getting into Freemasonry, I read Robert Hewitt Brown's Stellar Theology and Masonic Astronomy. So he unpacks Masonic symbolism, primarily Blue Lodge symbolism, from this sort of astro-mythological / astrotheological perspective, right? So he astrologizes a lot of the events and phenomena and symbols and things. So that initially whet my appetite. So then about 5 or 6 years after that, and I'm sure you've experienced this, people tend to, you get into the Western esoteric traditions, and then over time, you start to sort of specialize. And my specialization just rapidly gained traction, which was astrology. How it happened, though I was into it just kind of from afar, and I did and still do entertain those ideas about modern astrology being sort of, that post-theosophical sort of new agey 20th century astrology. I'll just tell you, I don't find a lot of value in it. I think it's overly simplified. Sun sign astrology particularly, like I'm a Leo, I'm a Capricorn. I've come to find out that statements like that are not only sort of underdeveloped and betray a lack of understanding of the art, but they're also kind of an absurd notion. Nobody would say, no serious astrologer would say, I'm a Leo, I'm a Capricorn, because the signs qualify the planets. They modify the planets. So they're more of an adjective than a noun, really. The planets are the nouns. So if anything, like one might say something like, my sun is in Gemini, or, I am all of the planets as they are arrayed against the signs of the zodiac, and things like, of course, in the 60s and 70s, from what I understand, it was common for people to be like, hey, baby, what's your sign in bars and things, just a common pickup line. And they were asking, I presume, for their sun sign, what's your... Now, asking that wouldn't tell you anything about a person's, or very little about a person's datability or whether they want to fool around. What you might ask is something like, who is the lord of your fifth house? Or, what sort of transits to the fifth house or to Venus, let's say, if I wanted to pinpoint things that have to do with dating and, maybe a sexual encounter. There's ways to do that actually make sense. Far more sense than simplistically saying, what is your sun sign? So anyway, to tidy this up a bit, I ended up getting Dane Rudyard's Astrology of Personality. Now, this is a work of psychological astrology, which, it's kind of, you can get it into dicey territory with the purely psychological astrology. I don't necessarily take that view. I believe that the psychological perspective is a part of astrology. It's as much a part of it now as it was 2,000 years ago. People had a psyche and a sense of self 2,000 years ago, of course, and this was part of the astrological picture. Anyway, I'm giving you more than you bargained for by asking me this.
This is fantastic. Please keep going.
But
fascinating.
So after Dane Rudyard, I kind of began to, I stayed around that area of astrology for a year or so. And then I decided to take some courses. And one of the courses, in the interest of going back and, having a sound foundation, I decided to go back to Hellenistic astrology and just kind of rebuild the edifice from the ground up. Start at the very beginning of the tradition, 2,000 years ago in Alexandria. And by the beginning of the tradition, I mean when planets, signs, houses, and aspects, those four major components of astrology, those four things make something astrology. We don't call it astrology in the absence of any of those four things. Astrology is planets, in signs, in houses, and how they are aspected on the ecliptic. So proper astrology begins around the turn of the last millennium, or we say 2 millennia ago now. So I decided to go back to the beginnings of the tradition. And in doing so, I took Chris Brennan's course on the subject, Hellenistic astrology course, and was just blown away with the richness of it, like with the nuance, this really complex art, and I'm like a systems oriented person. So it immediately registered with me, like this is something I really want to dig deeply into. I studied with him, and then I studied with horary astrology with Christopher Warnock, which is just another branch of traditional astrology. And it's just been my focus over these last, I'd say really seriously, these last 5 years, before COVID though. So mentioning COVID, the mundane astrology around 2020 was absolutely, totally literal. You hit it on the head, resonating with that was the case. Many mundane astrologers, and by mundane I mean astrologers who deal with political, social astrology for groups of people, like countries in the world. Yeah, many astrologers knew from the auspices that this is what was going down. And at that time, I had a personal kind of revelation at that period, which really sealed the deal for me astrologically, making this definitely the focus and the foundation of everything I was to build afterward. What happened for me was my wife and I were in the habit of just doing direct observation, would go out in the front of the house and, just watch the dance of the planets. Because if you remember, Jupiter and Saturn were coming into a grand conjunction on the first degree of Aquarius. So this is the first time they were moving into the air signs, air signs, technical, intellectual, etc. And they met. I remember just watching it in fact, it was within, I want to say, 3 hours of the moment that the winter solstice went exact. So the very degree, the very time, within about 3 hours of that, there was an exact conjunction, a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And we were watching this, and I had this thought. I'll kind of wrap it up with this idea. I had this thought that I felt like it was accompanied with a sense of like embarrassment. I felt like so like just like little, because the thought was, who am I to say that the only meaning and purpose that these celestial bodies have is that which I deem like worthy to bestow upon them, as if there's some sort of projection, some psychological projection of mine onto the cosmos. It rushed upon me that there is an ensouled, enchanted cosmos, that doesn't rely on me for its meaning and depth and purpose.
No, that's actually couldn't lead into the next question better than that. So when we were emailing, I told you I wanted to ask some like big picture questions, and so the one I wanted to ask now was, for talking to those kinds of people who would like we were not too long ago, who think astrology is complete nonsense. How do you frame the general construction? Even sounding this sounds like such an absurdly huge question, but the general construction of reality, how is it that astrology can work? Like how do you perceive reality and how astrology fits into that?
I see. Yeah, so I'll have to kind of preface that first. One of the things I love about astrology is that it forces us to grapple with these big philosophical questions, some of the biggest, free will versus determinism, objectivity versus subjectivity, symbolic indicative astrology or physically causal astrology. These are just a few of the massive questions that come up. So in this context that you're bringing up, I would talk then about the symbolic versus physically causal mechanism, right? So I've kind of vacillated back and forth between these two. Is it oscillated or vacillated? Whichever one of those. Back and forth between the symbolic kind of paradigm, where that is to say, events and phenomena in the celestial sphere symbolize events and phenomena on the terrestrial sphere, because of course that's the primary notion that astrology is based on. It's based on the resonant relationship between the macrocosm, i.e. the celestial sphere, and the microcosm, the terrestrial sphere. So it fits with that sort of Ptolemaic, Tychonic kind of, that cosmology, with the celestial spheres, the planetary spheres, the sphere of the fixed stars in the zodiac, and then down here, the sublunary sphere of the four elements,
Mm.
So, and I tend to go with the indicative model that these events and phenomena and configurations and geometrical patterns on the ecliptic symbolize events on the terrestrial sphere. However, the other argument, to be fair, there are physically causal. There is a physically causal mechanism or several mechanisms working in concert that the emission of rays, like Al-Kindi would say, very important astrologer from the Perso-Arabic kind of era, the Islamic Golden Age, which there were tons of just great astrologers at that time. In fact, Baghdad was astrologically elected. The formation of, so was Cairo. Both Cairo and, in fact, the word Cairo, the name Cairo, I can't remember the Arabic exactly, but it's from an Arabic word that means, I think, the conqueror, and it was used in reference to Mars, because at the time that they were laying the foundation for Cairo, stretching the ropes. There was this thing that they used to do, and one of the watchers, one of the horoscopos meaning our watcher, was to say what planets, what bodies were on the eastern horizon at the ascendant at that time. And he shouted, legendarily, he shouted something like, Cairo, the conqueror, but in Arabic. Anyway,
that's cool. That's fascinating, man.
But back into the mechanical sort of material and causal model. Yeah, rays, or some people say there's some sort of quantum reaction or whatever's going on, that there's, obviously the sun and the moon affect the terrestrial sphere. The light and heat of the sun, the gravity of the moon affecting tidal patterns, and maybe even microcosmically, maybe even women's menstrual cycles, menstruation, the moon, same etymology, a month, so yeah, I think maybe it's a little bit of both, but I'm putting more eggs in the indicative basket than the physically causal basket, because I don't think astrology needs to be justified by your typical post-enlightenment positivistic materialist worldview. We don't need Descartes and Isaac Newton and all of these sort of post-enlightenment era materialist natural philosophers. We don't need them to justify astrology, which was going on before them and after them. So that gets into part of my beef with the Enlightenment project. Yes, there were a lot of great things that came about during the Enlightenment, but one of the negative things is that astrology and astronomy were separated. The qualitative component, that is astrology, was separated from the merely quantitative astronomical component. Same thing happened with alchemy. Alchemy and chemistry, which used to be one sort of unified system of, correspondences and sympathy, was pulled apart to where you merely get mundane chemistry, and then that, crazy BS alchemy, where it's like, and then same with magic, you could say. The whole enchanted magical worldview, that sort of, with the anima mundi permeating everything, the soul of the cosmos, that whole magical worldview basically was just exorcised from the cosmos as exercised like you do with a demon. It was just, the part of the, a byproduct of the Enlightenment project was to disenchant at least the sciences, but culture flowed from that as well, and you got a real mess. And now we're dealing with the furthest reaches of that crisis that began at that time. We're in that crisis now, except we're on the other side of it. So it's almost like an inverse Rosicrucianism, because remember, the Rosicrucians and Freemasons actually as well were the last vestiges of that enchanted worldview that squeaked by just past the Enlightenment. They were able to maintain their enchanted worldviews. And now we're on the other side of that, where science is struggling to keep up with unexplainable phenomena. But the only thing that's left, the only thing that maybe they have explanatory recourse to, would be something occult, because occult just means hidden, right? It's an action. It's an action it's a causal action. It's hidden causality. Let's say that. Hidden causality.
I love that. I love that term. So we were talking about this indicative astrology and this reflection of the macrocosm, the microcosm, and this deep structure of the universe that allows us to observe movements of some kind of deeper causality. And so I wonder, like, this structure, this thing, whatever this is it leading somewhere, do you think? Is there like a goal or an endpoint, or is it just this eternally circulating machine?
I like to think the latter, because that fits. You ever read any Miche Eliade?
I know the name, but I have not read the work.
Oh, it's fantastic. I was just reading through everything of his I could find over the last year or so. And he sort of points to or describes this sort of cyclical kind of worldview, right? Cyclical time, to where it's a festival oriented time where you have the vernal equinox and festivals that celebrate that particular happening, right? And then the solstices, the equinoxes, but also events in the life of man, like coming of age ceremonies, and the Hieros Gamos, which is the mating of the sky father and the earth mother, and the rain comes down and lightning, and that's how you get a Zeus and a Hera, so there's all of these motifs that promote that sort of cosmogenesis, what Eliade calls the paradigmatic moments. And it leads into ideas such as theurgy. It makes possible ideas such as theurgy, which is a microcosmic recreation of a cosmic, mythic, paradigmatic event. So what is theurgy if it is not, a microcosmic recreation of Genesis? It's because it's theurgy, theos, God, ergon, which is work, God working. So it's essentially sort of reactualizing those events, those cosmic and mythic events, in a cyclical sort of pattern. Now, the converse to that would be your typical like Judeo-Christian notion of time, where there's a cosmogony and an eschatology. There's a beginning and an end. We're moving from the arrow of time goes one direction, and we are moving towards the end times, and it will end. And, there's a beginning and an end, as opposed to just an eternal recurrence, which is really a Stoic idea. It goes back very far. 2,500 years, maybe, or at least 2,000 years. And I say Judeo-Christian, I am a Christian, so I'm
Right.
fine saying that. So I'm not, bagging on Christianity.
Right.
I'm saying that it does, to some extent, partake of linear time, the linear perspective that there will be an end. Just as there was a beginning, there will be an end. So, but at least and that's why Saturn for the Jews, and Saturn, right? Chronos. Chronos is time. Saturn, the black cubes and the hexagram, a Saturnian kind of image. It's even on that storm I think it's the South Pole of Saturn. There's a
Oh, right.
So Saturn plays heavily into the Judaic mythos, right? Because look at the holy day, Shabbat. It's Saturn, Sabbath, Shabbat. Saturn's day is the holy day is Saturday. So Saturn, Kronos, Saturn, father time, if you will. This very notion is this very Judaic notion is Saturnian to the max. So, but Christianity, there's a bit of a difference, because Christianity, with Constantine and instituting it as the Roman state religion and things, it had to adopt some elements of the pagan festival calendar, or it would be immensely unpopular. So they had to adopt some of these Mithraic festivals, some of these other pagan festivals. And that's why you get celebrations of the Saint John. That's why you get Christmas in the way that we celebrate it. Easter in the way that Easter is an equation. It's a cosmic equation itself. Easter is the first Sunday, day of the sun, after the first full moon, after the vernal equinox. So it goes, you have the vernal equinox, which is the spring equinox, then you wait for the next full moon, and then the following Sunday after that is Easter. That is how they get Easter. It's an astrological equation. So,
man, that's fascinating. I have no idea about that.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the adopting of some of these paganistic motifs to make it maybe a little less or a little more accommodating than just your strictly linear beginning and end time.
Right. Yeah, it's around that time that I started taking astrology a little more seriously. I was thinking about, I'm not a programmer, but I've taken some courses in programming, and when you're programming a computer, you use a lot of these for loops and while loops, and you just create these loops, and you say while or for condition X, do Y. And as the cycle goes, it can increment up by numbers or increment down by numbers. But the point is, there are these loops, these event loops,
right?
Which is just a large part of how a computer, how an application works. And by nesting these loops within each other, you can accomplish really complicated outcomes.
Sure.
And so while I was thinking about that, I was like, dude, maybe that would to me, that would explain it. Because if we have all these nested loops, these archetypal event cycles that are happening all the time, all around us, that would explain in a very rational way how astrology would work. It kind of takes simulation theory and puts it in with everything else.
Sure.
To me, that helped me connect with it intellectually and be well, okay, that actually kind of makes sense,
For sure, like a fractal, it's a fractal notion. Now, I definitely think of horary astrology as tapping into what you're talking about. The reason why, do you know what horary is?
I do not.
All right, for you and your listeners, horary astrology is an ancient branch of astrology. It goes back almost 2,000 years. And it is question-based astrology. So what happens is the querent asks a question of the astrologer, and the mechanism is different than natal or electional or mundane astrology in that when the astrologer fathoms the question, when the question is understood and completely formed in the mind of the astrologer, that's when the chart is erected. So a chart is cast for the moment that the astrologer understands the question, which
Whoa.
is a strange mechanism, but you would be blown away to see how this works. So what I think is happening there, again, not that I think I need to justify this by any notion of physics.
Right, right.
Whatever. I mean, who cares about that?
If it works, basically, right?
Exactly. So, that's one thing that's become a pet peeve of mine. Do we really need to talk about magic in terms of like Deepak Chopra level quantum physics? And do we have to do that?
Right, right.
But I mean, no sweat for people who do. That's great. But I mean, I don't have to do that. I mean, I don't feel the need to do that. I think it's to some extent beneath the very notion of magic and astrology and enchanted. Anyway, so horary astrology is question-based astrology. When the question is understood by the astrologer, a chart is cast at that moment. What I think is happening there is something close to what you're saying. The answer is out there in the ether. And I mean literally ether in the Aristotelian sense, in that celestial ether, which is above the elemental sublunary sphere, in the etheric spheres, if you're familiar with Agrippa and his cosmology. So there's a collapse that happens, or rather a condensation. You know how you have like a cold glass of water on a hot, muggy day, and you get that humidity from the air just sort of condenses on the outside of the glass. I think there's some sort of etheric condensation happening at that moment. If I had to explain it physically, that there's a collapse of maybe some sort of, whether you say a waveform or whatever, that there's a collapse at that moment that occurs that concentrates and consolidates and condenses the answer to that question in the symbolism of the chart. So a chart is cast for that moment, and then the proficient horary astrologer, and there are different rules for they philosophically make sense with the entire astrological corpus, but there are a different set of specialized techniques that you use in horary. And all of that kind of condenses onto the horary chart, and then the proficient horary astrologer begins the hermeneutic process of interpreting that chart, which I think is the funnest thing in the world. Like, horary is so fun. Even if it's questions like, where are my car keys? I understand that question. I look at 6:48 p.m. I cast a chart for that time, and then it's in that chart, and it's up to my like. It's such a detective, and I've done it for crime too. Like, I've done it for. Yeah, I've done it for a missing person. I don't know if they ever found her, but I did cast the chart and do the horary for somebody a few years ago.
Man, that's interesting.
Yeah, so and then I've had a lot of horaries that I did get to see the final outcome, and a good percentage of them came true, and they don't just come true in like yes or no. They come true in, because you put detail in there, like it's in a cold, dry place. It's probably to the south. It's not too far from where you last saw it. So there's those sorts of details. Exactly. Those sorts of details come up. It's south from where you last saw it. It's in a cold, dry place. It might be under something made of wood. You get stuff like that when you do a horary, if you know the language of the hermeneutic language of the art. Yeah.
Man, that's really interesting. So I read you do a lot with I don't know if this is the correct term, but like daemonic astrology.
Daimonic, yeah.
Daimonic. Yeah, I read you had a blog post on it and you talked about it in at least one of your interviews. Could you just expand on what that is and how you came to that particular study?
Sure. So it sort of begins with the myth of air, ER, the myth of air. It's a sequence in the 10th book of Plato's Republic at the very end. And in this sequence, there's sort of a near-death experience is kind of described at that point. This guy, Air. And when he's getting, it's almost like a reincarnation or a metempsychosis kind of motif happening. It's not exactly that, but it's something like that. And as he is to go through the gate and become incarnate again, like this is pre-incarnation. He chooses a daimon. He chooses his character and his destiny in the personified form of a daimon. And the daimon is, the predecessor of words like daemon or demon, it's kind of the root. It means to cut, I thought it was like to cut or to sever or to grab. I forget what the actual like little phonetic root is, but he chooses this daimon, and that daimon guides the pre-incarnate soul through the spheres. And this is the part that fascinated me. This is what really got the wheels turning for me. As the soul is guided psychopompically by this daimon down into essentially the underworld, right? Down through these 7 planetary spheres. At each one of those spheres, the soul takes on qualities associated with that sphere, vices and virtues. Qualities are taken on. This is not just in Plato. There's a lot of people who have elucidated these ideas, a lot of Neoplatonists, and anyway, so the soul takes on these characteristics, these attributes, these personality through when it is guided down through these 7 planetary spheres until it reaches incarnation. There's a certain time when this happens. It's like the prenatal syzygy is when the soul is yoked to the body, which is the new or full moon immediately preceding birth. And then, so that's how we become sort of, that's how personality and character is sort of bestowed on the pre-incarnate soul. So then, with that in mind, Neoplatonic philosophers and others have reverse engineered that sequence to where you can give up vices and virtues and, what Porphyry called astral garments. You could give those up and rise through the 7 planetary spheres and be liberated from material, dross materiality, but also liberated from causality. And you could do this while you're still alive. It's said, Macrobius talks about the philosophical death. It's not a physical death. The philosophical death is when you align those tumblers of character to where the soul can literally slip through the 7 planetary spheres without tasting death. And what happens is once the soul penetrates the Ogdoad, which is the sphere of the fixed stars in the zodiac, it is beyond causality and it is reintegrated with the one, Tohen. So that's henosis or theosis or whatever you care to call it in whatever tradition you're in. But that whole mechanism just really fascinated me, and I'd never seen it put together in one place. I was getting here and there little pieces of it and stitching it together. It's in fact a manuscript I've been working on for a while, and I've already written several articles on it, which published in an astrology magazine, which is like the primary astrological organ in North America, the astrological journal type of thing. Anyway, so I'm still working on that idea and working on the notion of character development as a way to line up those tumblers, those planetary, tumblers, to where you can get a clear path and the soul can be liberated from causality and reintegrated with the one. Of course, it's a complicated project, but one other thing I wanted to mention on that was exciting to me, because it's technical and I like technical system oriented stuff. When the soul is coming down into incarnation, going through those 7 planetary spheres, the birth chart involved in this, because the birth chart, your birth chart, my birth chart, it all gives, it gives the position of the planets as they were arrayed against the signs of the zodiac. That's what it looked like as the soul was coming down, right? So you have a picture of that. If you have a good birth time, you have a picture of your descent through those. So what happens is each of those planets, some planets are happier in certain signs than others. So what I'm saying is, like, Saturn doesn't like to be in Aries, for example. So if he's in Libra, he's very happy. He's exalted there. All the planets have places where they like to be and where they don't like to be, and also neutral places where it's like they're what you call peregrine. Peregrine just means they're a wanderer. It's a technical term from the Perso-Arabic tradition. So what I'm saying is, you have a schematic of character in your natal chart. You have your whole character there. All you have to do is be proficient in astrological symbolism or consult an astrologer who will show you, like, the qualities, who will assess the condition of your 7 visible planets, because that tells you your vices, your virtues, your character, your personality. It's a arduous process, right? But I'm getting to the thing that really excites me about it, is that each planet has a range of significations. So let's take Saturn let's take Mars. Mars is an easier one to talk about. Let's say the Mars in that nativity, as the soul was, the pre-incarnate soul was coming down. Let's say Mars was in great condition. He was in Aries, he was in his phase, in his term, etc. He was in great condition. That means you will get the most positive martial significations, which are things like bravery, courage, and valor, right? Let's say Mars was in just so shape. He was peregrine, just neutral. You would get the neutral Mars significations, which are things like energy and separation, these more abstract kind of neutral significations of Mars. Now let's say Mars was totally screwed up. Let's say he was in Libra, where he's very unhappy. He's in detriment there. Then you would get the negative Martian significations, which are things like violence, aggression, terror, and things like, the nasty martial significations. So every planet has a range and scope like that. Your birth chart, as a schematic of character, tells you how your planets are, are they positive, neutral, or negative? You could take that and you could, like, jot down, you could really get in there and fine tune the character of the native being the subject of the natal chart. Now, if you have that schematic of character, and the composition of this person's character astrologically, then it's just a matter of balancing temperaments and using, like, alchemy and theurgy, the other hermetic arts. Once astrology has given you the schematic, then you use alchemy and theurgy to tweak everything and make it so you can align those tumblers and reverse engineer the process.
Man,
And
that's incredible. So it's
yeah,
like your natal chart becomes like a personal map to enlightenment, is like what I'm hearing.
in this system, yeah.
Yeah,
In
that's
this
cool.
daimonic system, yes.
And that is, so that was an established system, but you are what you are working on. Could you explain specifically what your intended contribution will be?
No, nobody has spelled that out.
Oh, really? So
Yeah,
this is totally new, fresh
nobody has said
thinking.
what I said right now about this mechanism. And most
Man,
people don't even know what this mechanism is, haven't even thought about it. This is some of it's 2,000 years, 1,000 years. We're talking about old stuff that people had ample time to reconstruct. Nobody has reconstructed that.
hmm.
That I've found and I've looked. I've been interested in this for years. You
Have you
know,
have you tried using the system on somebody, or are you still figuring out how the pieces will work?
still figuring it out. One good place to start is figuring out who your personal daimon is. And this I've done for myself and for other people. And you never tell the planetary affiliation of your planet. Well, and you never tell its name, because there's Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa tells us two methods, in fact, two or three methods of deriving the name of your daimon, or your Almutin Figuris, or your holy guardian angel, whatever you care to call this entity. It's the same as the tutelary genius, the higher genius, the daimon. Um, and there are ways to discern not only the planetary affiliation of, like, I could look at your chart tonight and it would take me about an hour. I could do some calculations and I could find the planetary affiliation of your daimon. And then if I wanted to, I can find out the name of your daimon, because I know the method. All I need to do is look at your chart.
Wow.
So I can get the name, which is found in the chart, by casting the alphabets from the ascendant in zodiacal order.
Hmm.
Agrippa talks about this. It's fascinating. It's so intricate. It's so like complex and cool. And
Yeah.
you really you end up with the planetary affiliation of your daimon. Do you know what that means in terms of your theurgy? What you would be able to do theurgically? You would be able to exactly direct all of your personal practices towards the intercession of your very personal daimon.
Huh.
That's mind blowing. Isn't that
Right.
mind blowing?
Yeah, yeah. In that part, you do know the technique to do that part.
Oh yeah.
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 Man, that is wild stuff. And
Mm. And you don't find that all in one place either. That I had to take hither thither and
huh,
reconstruct it.
that's amazing work, man. Like that's really exciting. You're making a singular unique contribution to human knowledge. That's
Well, it's also I suspect this may have been the very, like, one of the very central astrological projects in antiquity. This,
right.
at least in terms of people like Porphyry, Porphyry and his milieu, that species of Neoplatonist, and your Hermetists, because look at, I'm sure you're familiar with the Poimandres or the
Right.
Pymander, the
Right.
first book of the Corpus Hermeticum. Look in the first book of the Corpus Hermeticum, look at verses 24, 25, 26. Can I grab it and read it to you?
Yeah, sure. Please.
Hold on one second.
Okay.
1 second. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. So, yeah, I quickly grabbed my Way of Hermes. This
Oh,
came
dude,
out
I
on,
just bought that book last week.
yeah, I was looking for the Copenhagen, but this one just was a quickest grab, and I know it's in here, and this is a good translation.
Hmm.
So this is the Corpus Hermeticum, book 1 of the 17 books of the Philosophical Hermetica. This isn't, ancient. This is from antiquity, so this isn't some new agey Kybalion stuff.
Right, right.
This is not that. All right, so we're talking about the planetary ascent through the spheres, reverse engineering that very process that we were just talking about.
Right.
Um, okay, so this is 20, I'm going to do 25 through 26, or rather 24 through 26.
Okay.
All right. You have taught me these things well, as I wished, O Noose. Now tell me how the way back is found. To this, Poimandres replied, first, in the dissolution of the material body, one gives the body itself up to change. The form you had becomes unseen, and you surrender to the divine power your habitual character, now inactive. The bodily senses return to their own sources. Then they become parts again and rise for action, while the seat of emotions and desires go to mechanical nature. Thus, here's where it gets good. Thus, a man starts to rise up through the harmony of the cosmos. To the first plane, he surrenders the activity of growth and diminution. That's the moon. Growth and diminution. To the second, the means of evil, trickery, now being inactive. That's Mercury.
Mm.
To the third, covetous deceit, now inactive. That's Venus. That's the vice of Venus. And to the fourth, the eminence pertaining to a ruler, the sun, being now without avarice. To the fifth, impious daring and reckless audacity, Mars. And to the sixth, evil impulses for wealth, all of these being now inactive. That's Jupiter, wealth. And to the seventh plane, the falsehood which awaits in ambush. That's Saturn. Those are all the very vices associated with each of the planets, and they're in order. You notice that?
Wow.
It goes the moon, Mercury, Venus, the
Right.
sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. That is the very Ptolemaic order, and they were going from the bottom up through the top.
Mm.
And then he says this, then stripped of the activities of the cosmos, he enters the substance of the eighth plane with his own power. The eighth is the sphere of the fixed stars in the zodiac. It's called the Ogdoad. And he sings praises to the Father with those who are present, etc. But it describes the planetary ascent.
So when you talk about this personal daemon and everyone having one, it seems like it would be dangerous for an enemy to get their hands on that knowledge, right? Like, is that what you were insinuating when you said like you should keep it a secret? People shouldn't know.
It's more that, so I mean that specifically about the name.
Oh, okay.
Because the name is it's very important in that tradition, because the name is your sort of key, your connection to that entity. If you have the name of the entity, and you keep that closely guarded and very secret, not because you're necessarily worried. I mean, what percentage of people do you think, if I told them my daimon's name, the percentage of people who would even think to do something,
Right.
would be infinitesimal. But you don't want to spread it around because you lessen the power of that connection. The power of that connection sometimes is based in that secrecy, the sort of invaluability, if that's a word. How secrets are invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Invaluability, I think, would be the word. By keeping it inviolate, you're keeping it sacred. The sacred is often the concealed, the hidden, the isolated.
So when you uncovered the name of yours, did you notice any shifts in your life or in anything in your being?
Well, the big shift was that I started to involve the name, and the planetary affiliation, along with some There's a whole process, yes. So there was, in fact, one operation that a few of us did. I'm not going to get into too much detail about
Right,
this, but
right.
there was one operation that a few of us did independently, but friends of mine who are theurgists and astrologers. We did this operation that comes from a, a grimoire called the Picatrix. You familiar with the
Yes, I
Picatrix?
am. Yes.
Okay, so in the Picatrix, there's an operation called the perfect nature. And the perfect nature is getting in touch with your tutelary geniuses, essentially. There are, in fact, there's you can take, you know how we were talking about the festival
Right,
calendar
right.
and reincorporating these pagan holidays and things like that to provide depth and meaning to the cyclical year, essentially.
Mhm.
The year is the temple, it's the templum tempus. But what you could do, and what's been on my mind, is ritualizing parts of specifically Hermetic and Neoplatonic documents. Like, for instance, there's one that was found among the Nag Hammadi texts. There was a Hermetic document called Discourse on the Eighth and Ninth, is the name of it. Discourse on the Eighth and Ninth, they are precisely talking about the Ogdoad, the sphere of the fixed stars in the zodiac, and the ninth, the Ennead. The ninth is the first moved, the primum mobile of the Aristotelian cosmos, right?
Mhm.
So the first move, it's the first kind of action, causal action, the first causal action. So you have the unmoved mover, then you have the first moved, and
Yeah.
that's the ninth. And that first moved is right outside of it's an angelic sphere, really,
Mm.
because it's right outside of the Ogdoad. Everything beyond the Ogdoad is what you call noetic. It's intellectual, it's angelic, it's super celestial.
Mm.
And anyway, back to taking these pieces of Hermetic and Neoplatonic texts and ritualizing them is precisely what they would have done, So when there's this ritual, well, there's this dialogue called Discourse on the Eighth and Ninth, and you could take parts of it and ritualize that in addition to corresponding synthemata or signatures in the terrestrial, like the appropriate incense, the appropriate
Right.
clothing, the appropriate music, the appropriate candles color, let's say. If you set up all that synthemata and line it up to whatever your theurgical project is, then you have more cosmic resonance.
Mm.
And in this sense, super cosmic resonance, So yeah, that's how it's changed. It's changed my mode of it's minutely focused my theurgical practice now. Whereas, I was kind of, I don't know, kind of learning and groping and,
Right.
but and I still am learning and groping, but
Right.
but I'm more groping than learning. But 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 isn't it, yeah, I think it's an interesting mechanism,
Oh,
right?
dude, that's amazing, man. Like I really hope that you get that all together. I'll definitely be looking forward to reading that. And so um yeah, so we're at the end of the hour, and so I guess this would be a good place to finish with this because I definitely wanted to give a chance. I'm going to be talking about the course that you have on the IHS teachable system, but also the services that you offer on your site. One of those is this daimonic path, correct?
Yeah, so I bought the domain names Quinarian astrology and daimonic astrology. Maybe next time I'll tell you about this whole Quinarian thing, because that's the book I have coming out on inner
Hmm.
traditions at the end of this year. Probably right around Christmas time, I have my fourth book coming out, which is called, well, tentatively, it's called The Astrological Shem HaMephorash, 72 Quinarian Keys to Occult Astrology. And
Wow.
this, I'm using this, a different mechanism than what we're talking about. That mechanism has to do with goetic demons and the angels of the Shem HaMephorash, and how each of them fit in the 72 quinaries of the zodiac. It's a mind-blowing, again, one of those meaty systems, very intricate systems that I like. I totally unpacked it in this, and that's another thing nobody has talked about.
Wow.
So I've got that coming out. In fact, go to my website, or as I was saying, you can just punch in quinarianastrology.com, or you
Okay.
could punch in daimonicastrology.com, and those two domain names go straight to their corresponding blog pages on my JaimePaulLamb.com. So my main thing is JaimePaulLamb.com, and appended from there, I have the Quinarian stuff, the daimonic stuff. I offer all kinds of services like, natal chart consultations, either on Zoom or in a PDF document. I do horary consultations, so you can ask me any question and I will answer it using horary astrology, synastry, which is couples astrology. So, you overlay two charts essentially. I do all kinds of stuff. Oh yeah, and then the calculation of the Almutin figuris. So I calculate the planetary affiliation of your daimon or your personal genius, and I tell you how to derive its name. I don't do that part of the operation for people, but I show you how to do it, and I give you PDF documents that guide you through that. So by the end of that process, you have the planetary affiliation of your daimon, which is going to help you when you're going back through those spheres. And you calculate the name of your daimon using Agrippa's method from 500 years ago.
Man, that's cool. And you also in one of the interviews you mentioned that you can actually like make a song for somebody based on the music of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a series of correspondences that I've gotten from Francus Gefurius Francanus or Francanus Gefurius, bunch of medieval guys. I use I think one of Kepler's sets of correspondences. I gathered all the musical correspondences regarding the harmony of the spheres, both zodiacal and planetary, and as they pertain to the seven church modes, the plagal and authentic church modes.
Mm.
And I take a harmonium, which is an acoustic, essentially Indian classical instrument. It's acoustic bellows operated organ.
Mm.
And I bought that harmonium specifically for this reason. I am a musician, just I have been my whole life.
Right.
So I offer like a 5-minute recording of the sound of your natal chart. So I cast your chart. I scribble my notes, like what correspondences I'm hitting and why. I give you a copy of my notes and a 5-minute recording of the sound of your natal chart. So you really do get to hear kind of one interpretation of the harmony of your very nativity.
Man, that's really cool stuff. And also for the listeners, viewers, whichever platform you're watching on or listening on, I'm gonna put your YouTube channel and the link to your channel because your music is on there. I've been listening to it, and yeah, so that'll be available for everybody as well. But man, Jamie, thanks so much. This has been awesome. I really appreciate it. And also I'm as soon as this is done, I'm gonna be hitting you up for one of those services, man. So
Sure.
yeah, dude, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, best of luck with the books. And is there anything else you want to share or
Yeah, just be on the do go to my website and see if, any of that stuff you're interested in, not because I'm trying to hawk my wares or anything,
right.
but just because if you're interested in astrology, I've got some pretty cool offerings that, might inspire you. Inspire, fill you with spirit. Oh, that was one other thing. People say, you hear it a lot nowadays. People say, I'm spiritual, but not religious. And
Right.
I want to ask, do you believe in entities, like spirit entities, like demons and angels?
Right.
And they never do, actually. But yeah, and the other thing is keep a lookout for my book on inner traditions, coming out later this year, tentatively titled The Astrological Shem HaMephorash.
Man, that title sells itself, man. That's fascinating stuff. And thanks again, Jamie. I really appreciate it. Oh, wait, and you're presenting at the upcoming IHS conference, right?
I am. Yes, I'm very excited about that. I've got like 12 things happening this year.
Wow.
I've got almost a couple of things a month, I think. So all over the place, including Egypt. We're going to the new Heliopolis. PD
Hmm.
Newman. Have you had PD Newman on your show?
No, but I love his work.
Oh, you
I
want me
love
to?
his
I'll
work.
hook you up with him. He's a genius. You got
Oh,
to
I'd
talk.
love that, man. Yeah. He just came out with Theurgy. He just came out with the book Theurgy
He
like 2
did.
months ago, 3 months
He
ago.
he did. He's one of my very best friends. We talk daily,
Oh,
and
wow, really?
yeah, I'll hook you up with him. We go way back.
Oh man, that'd be fantastic. I really appreciate that. And
Yeah,
yeah, and so Jamie will be presenting at the IHS conference, and it has all this other. Have you seen the Temple of Dendera, the new book by Jose Barrera?
I haven't.
No, he did some really cool stuff with it. He
The
just went.
Dendera Zodiac.
Yeah. He went in there. He's a computer guy, so he went in there and took like 5,000 pictures or something and used some kind of software where he stitches them all together and has it's not just that though. The book has substance too. He
Yeah,
goes into some of the astrological significance of everything that's in the book, but it's also just a beautiful book. It's like a great coffee table book.
yeah.
But,
I'd love to see that. My wife and I had the pleasure of being there. When
oh
did
really?
I think it was 2017 or something we went. But we went to Dendera as well. It was really great. It's a memorable site. We saw everything, and
Really?
Dendera kind of stood out. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, all right. Sorry for keeping you, man. Thank you so much, dude. And I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jeff. All
All
right,
right.
I'm gonna email you later.
All right. All
All
right.
right.
Awesome, man. Peace out.
Bye.